All right. Make sure you got that poll question filled out. Grab your cup of coffee. And we've got a lot to cover in just an hour. So we're going to go ahead and just get started right into it. I'll start with just reading over the bios of our lender panelists here so that everyone can get a sense of who they're going to be hearing from. And then as those who are coming in here in the first couple minutes, they'll get to hear most of the content here. But joining us this morning for this panel is we have three ag lenders, as well as Ben Gordon, the CEO of Fractal. I'm excited about this one. We've done several of these webinars with Fractal before on various aspects of farm finance, I would say. But this one is very lender focused, which I think is appropriate, not only given the time of the year, but given the fact that we tend to highlight economists, we tend to highlight companies, we tend to highlight farmers, but I don't see a whole lot of focus on the lender's perspective. And as most of you joining us know very well, that's a very, very important perspective to understand in the business of farming. So excited to dive into these three perspectives from these three lenders. And joining us today, we have Grant Wiese. He's a former ag loan underwriter and current ag lender in southern Nebraska, while also farming corn and soybeans with his dad and brother. He combines these experiences to help farmers creatively acquire land and grow their financial literacy. For more of Grant's great content, you can sign up for his weekly newsletter at farm640.com. And Grant, you also have a farm buying toolbox, right? That I'm sure we'll talk about at some point today.
Yep. It's available and open for this week only. So just trying to help producers buy ground and understand their finances.
Great. Also joining us is Becky King. With over 25 years of experience, Becky oversees the ag banking relationship team at Old National Bank. Their ag portfolio is geographically diverse across the Midwest. The team focuses on row crop, livestock, and agribusiness opportunities, assisting producers with operating, equipment, and real estate financing, as well as Old National Bank's suite of business deposit services. Good morning, Becky.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
And you're based where?
I'm based in Galesburg, Illinois, which is in Western Illinois.
Okay, Western Illinois. Great. Also in Illinois, but in Northern Illinois is our third lender panelist, banking panelist, Jeremy Dutch. Jeremy is the farming banker and part of his family's farm located in Blaine, Illinois. Jeremy manages the hog finishing business, is a partner in the row crop operation, and a member of D6, the land holding company as well. This involvement allows him to talk the talk and understand what farmers and business owners are facing today because he's a farmer and business owner himself. Jeremy has been in finance for over 20 years, where he started in the investment world, helping manage 401k rollovers, IRAs, and 529 plans. You can hear Jeremy's take on the ag industry on his podcast, The Farming Banker. Good morning, Jeremy.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, let's dive right into things here this morning. Looks like we've got a group already ready to go, anxious to your information. I want, for those of you who are in attendance, each and every one of you to have a chance to tailor the content today to your questions. And for that, we have a Q&A icon. So if you look on your screen, for me, it's right in the bottom center of the screen. There's like a little box with a question mark that says Q&A. If at any point for our panel today you have a question, please just click on that icon and ask your question. They're going to be able to see the questions as they come through. We're going to try to answer as many of them as we can live for all to benefit. But feel free to ask a question at any time. Please don't wait till the end, because what happens is, like, too many people wait to the end, and we are going to try to stop right on the hour. So if you wait too long, we might not get to it. So as the question comes to mind, or if you're coming in here with a question, please go ahead and use that Q&A box to ask your question, and don't hold back, because I want to get to everybody's questions here today. Well, let's kind of set the scene here a little bit. I'm sure a lot of people are showing up to this webinar because the current state, of the farm economy, there's a lot of uncontrollables, things we wish we could control, things that we wish were better. But today we want to focus on some of the things we can control, and especially in the context of talking to our lender, what are some of those things a farmer can control that they should be paying attention to headed into this time of year? And as the panel is digesting that question, we do have our poll results back, and it's really interesting how kind of evenly split this is. Do you feel prepared to meet with your lender? 35% say yes, 35% say no, and 29% say unsure. Okay, well, we are going to help at least the 29% get a little bit more sure, and hopefully we help the 35% that say no feel a little bit more prepared this hour. But let's get back to that question. All right, we talked about the uncontrollables. What are the controllables that farmers can do this time of year to better prepare to meet with their lender? And Jeremy, if you don't mind, let's start with you out there in Northern Illinois.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the biggest keys to getting prepared or having a better experience for your lender this time of year is just being able to close out your year with accurate information. Knowing exactly where your cost of production was, knowing how much inventory is sold, when it's sold, how much is unpriced, where your prepaids are at. Just trying to gather an accurate picture that you then can go and have communication with your lender about. And I think one other key is to be as honest and transparent as possible with your lender. Tell them the good, the bad, the ugly, in areas and where, the lender can help. And I think no surprises are always the best. So that's a little bit of a tease on my side of it.
And Becky, how about you? What do you see this time of year that people aren't paying enough attention to when it comes to their own controllables?
In terms of their controllables, I think that this is the time when everyone is really starting to look into 2025. So expense management here, paying attention to what your dollar is going to pay for in 2025 is important. I totally echo Jeremy's comments about being prepared with your 2024 summary. But the other thing that I like to say is that bankers like to help farmers that like to help themselves. And so if you're coming in maybe with some news that isn't so great, maybe your 2024 didn't turn out the way you wanted to, bring your ideas, your suggestions on what you can do to, whether it's to improve your liquidity or maybe revising your marketing plan. What are your ideas? Because we want to help you. So help us help you.
Absolutely. And then we're going to talk more specifically about what are some of those ideas that the farmers could consider here today. But Grant, let's bring you in as well. What do you notice in general that farmers are showing up more prepared, more focused on these controllables towards the end of the year?
Yeah, I like how Jeremy kicked us off here because there's a lot of uncontrollables throughout the year, but start to get a handle on where those took place. So get that cash flow updated, know exactly how much grain was marketed, and have some exact figures when you do meet with your lender. You want to have confidence in the information that you're bringing to them and have some documentation behind those figures to help support your position and show that while maybe it was a crazy year and it didn't turn out how you planned or how you wanted it to, we're going to move forward with some confidence in what we have in front of us. We know exactly where we are positioned, and we're ready to make decisions based off of where our position landed this year, despite the fact that it maybe didn't go how we wanted it to.
And it was a crazy year, right? I'm glad you mentioned that. And maybe we should, most of the people in attendance are going to know what the year was like. But from your perspective, as you're talking to the farmers you work with, what is different about this year that is really bringing the content we're going to discuss here today into focus? Jeremy, I don't know if you want to kick us off on that one.
I can. One of the things I think that it's been, a kind of a narrative in my area of Northern Illinois, which I think is probably more, it's probably more broad than that, is just a lot of the uncertainty. A lot of the slippage of value in the crop and how to overcome that has been revolving around all of our topics this year. It's when the pricing was there to be able to be profitable. It was early in the season before crops were put in the ground. As we started to get a handle as to how much yield was going to be out there, the pricing slipped. And so, one of the things that I think that's been the biggest uncertainty, but one of the biggest benefits is that weather-wise, how much crop we have out there with deteriorating pricing has made it tough to make decisions on how we're going to move forward. But it ultimately, I think, ended up okay, where, I think there's going to be a lot of operations in our area that are able to yield their break even due to the increase yield, that we ended up having in this point of the year. But I think it's one of the problems that we're facing right now in my area is that there's a wide basis. And so even though there's plenty of grain out there, some of it still isn't, able to be marketed at a point that's above profitability. And so I think one of the challenges is it's the unpriced grain and the improved basis. Where does that come into being sold to hold and keep your working capital as you turn around and try to flip the calendar to the 25 year and start to outlay capital for the new crop?
And when we talk about an atypical year, normally you get a spring rally for your high price for corn, right? So normally it's that maybe March through June, maybe July, where you're seeing a high price. But this year, obviously for the 2024 crop, we saw the high price in January, early January. And where that really has impacted your working capital and how that impacts you is when you met with your banker last year, updated your balance sheet last year, you probably had $5, $5.50 corn on your balance sheet that was unpriced because that is where the price was at that point in time in January. And as we saw those prices decrease, a lot of that grain was not actually sold for $5 or $5.50, but maybe it was sold for $4.50, $4, or even $3.75, depending on your basis. So we went through the year with an overstated balance sheet, in particular an overstated working capital position. So you throw a overstated working capital position with a year that maybe had some losses due to high inputs or the deterioration of crop prices in addition to commodity prices. And we've just got to be very careful to make sure that we know where we are going to be sitting when we update the balance sheet again this year. Make sure that we have that confidence in our position before we go and make any big purchases or decisions for this upcoming year.
And I think that's fantastic context for the conversation here. And so, Becky, maybe I'll turn it over to you next. In the situation that so many are in, that Grant just described, what needs to happen this year that may or may not have had it happen last year leading up to this conversation with your lender? Oh, you're on mute, Becky.
I think we really need to think about what decisions are we going to make in the next 6 weeks, right? Oftentimes, this is when we're looking at taxable income and trying to potentially reduce or avoid that taxable income. That tends to turn towards a expenditure that's going to affect working capital. So I think trying to understand that pro forma balance sheet today is really important before you make any of those decisions. Protecting working capital is going to be a key. It's a focus that as Grant just described, you have to make sure that you're dealing with the reality of today's situation and not just what you thought your balance sheet said 11 months ago. So I think putting the attention to the detail right now is going to be beneficial for everyone, and just getting a reality check on where you are before you start making future decisions.
Yeah, and I really can appreciate what you're saying about kind of protecting working capital. I think that's probably going to be a theme for today. And I definitely want to tease out kind of what does that look like? What are the options on the table? Grant, I think you mentioned, last year there were opportunities around this time of year in the coming months to lock in prices above, cost of production. What options are on the table now, or the flip side of that? What do you see people doing now that you're like, oh, they should really talk to their lender about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to take us back a little bit further, not just the spring or winter of 2024, but if you actually go back a year prior to that, 2022, we came off of extremely high profits, potentially record profits in the farming sector. And that left a lot of working capital in individuals' pockets and farmers' bank accounts. And what was interesting over the course of the next 12 months after we saw that huge influx of income was we saw a lot of that working capital go ahead and deteriorate with 2023 based off of purchases. So to paint the picture a little bit further, we had a lot of cash in our pocket. We made a lot of purchases, and interest rates were at their peak or rising right then. So no one actually wanted to finance any of these purchases. So we just went and made a lot of purchases cash only and saw that working capital evaporate. Well, now it's the time that we need to protect that working capital. And so we need to make sure that we are evaluating how much cash should we put in forward on some of these purchases and upgrades and how much we should be financing. I know that interest rates aren't where we want them to be today, but you can't get that cash back if you blow it all. So we have to make sure that we're just monitoring every purchase and thinking it through and talking through with finance experts, your banker, before we're going forward and making a decision to make sure that we're preserving your most important asset, which is that working capital.
And Jeremy, how does the farming banker preserve his own working capital in this type of environment? What types of things have you looked at on your farming operation to try to preserve that most important asset Grant just described?
Yeah, and I think so. Grant, I think that's a great summary of how we got to where we're at, because I think that's a lot of the times you don't see the bigger picture of in the interest rate environment why working capital eroded. I think a lot of the times people just say, hey, it came from deteriorating in corn and crop prices, soybean prices, that type of stuff. But I think a lot of it did come through using of cash rather than financing. So I like that summary. But back to the question, Tim. For us at Dutch Farms, one of the things for preservation of working capital is knowing the timing of outlaying that capital too. And so one of the things that I think is important is to evaluate, what does it truly cost to carry your open grain, and what you're looking at as far as what's the improvement in basis you're hoping for, what's the carry in the market, and what's the cost of that on an interest perspective, storage perspective. Even if you have storage on site, on your farm, on farm storage, there's still a cost to that storage. And so if you understand that, a lot of the times, if you want to figure out how we improve capital, it's really looking at saying, hey, am I really going to pick up 20 cents of basis that I'm hoping to have, but yet it's going to cost me 15 cents in interest cost to hold it to that point, plus the potentially some of the prepaid discounts I'm losing on. So I think that's one of the biggest things that we look at this time of year is that when is the right time to outlay capital to turn your asset into cash, versus holding it and trying to pick up that additional margin. And sometimes I think we lose sight of that, and that can be some easy moves similar to tax planning that you can really look at for the year end in the next 2 months before we start the season.
Yeah, I like that approach, Jeremy. Another thing that you can do, and obviously this is coming from a banker standpoint, but now might not be the best time to pay off your term debt or make those extra payments towards term debt. A lot of those term debt notes that are out there are fixed for a certain period of time, and even if they are at 6 or 7%, your operating note might be sitting at 8, 7.5, 8, 8.5, 9% right now. So you need to have a realization of where the cost of funds are. It's expensive to run money on an operating note right now, to Jeremy's point, as far as paying attention to those prepaids and how you're going to utilize that cash, get it out into the market. So just remember that if you pay debt off early and run your working capital tight and low, and then you have an unexpected repair or expense that comes up, you might be financing that 100% at 9%. So it's important to keep that cash in mind to give you the flexibility to operate how you want to.
Go ahead, Becky, were you going to say something? And then I have an audience question to get to as well.
Sure. I really like what Grant just focused on, and maybe this is also a time to take a look. Were you really aggressive during the good times with amortization? If you purchased some assets and said, yeah, I can definitely pay that off in 10 years, 5 years or less, is this really the right time to be focusing on that aggressive payment structure? Or is there something you can do to lessen the pressure, on the operating, on the working capital, and do something different for next year? So it's always a good time to take a look at everything. You may end up with a little bit of a higher interest rate, But I like to encourage people to take a look when you're looking at the difference between interest rates, take a look at what the real dollars are. Because even if you have to refinance something at a little bit of a higher interest rate than where you were, overall, it may have a bigger impact, a better impact on your debt service coverage. So don't let the interest rate keep you from doing that analysis.
This is great. I really appreciate all this. We do have a question from the audience, and for those of you tuning in, you have the option to ask a question at any time. This one was asked anonymously. Other than the risk of rates ratcheting higher, is it okay to borrow against the machinery that was purchased with cash? Curious to get your thoughts on that. And Jeremy, I see you nodding. Let's let you dive in there first.
Well, I think the question, the answer, the short answer to that is yes. I mean, if you've got to, recapitalize, that's certainly, and you've got plenty of equity in that machinery, that's certainly an option to be able to get some cash back into the operation. But to the point of ratios and where that fits, along with the the overall lifespan of the equipment, when you have to turn it over, how many acres it's covering, depreciation on an annualized basis. All of those will be factors on how much you can harvest out of that. But I would say that the short answer is absolutely. If you need some cash and you've got some, free and clear machinery, that's an option to be able to harvest some equity and get some capital back into the farming operation.
Yeah, I would say also the short answer is yes. But however, you need to have an understanding of your financial position. So if you're an operation that's running a current ratio of 2-to-1, so that's twice as many current assets compared to current liabilities, but your cash flow is extremely tight, maybe you're looking at a break-even year for this upcoming year, it might be the right time to utilize some of that cash. However, vice versa, if you know that your working capital is running tight, maybe you have a current ratio of 1.25-to-1, but you are showing positive cash flow, then yes, absolutely, you should be looking and having that discussion with your lender as far as how much of a down payment you should make and how much you should be financing. But you need to find the right balance between your working capital levels and your cash flow.
And I'll add on to that too, just taking a look at what your leverage position is. It's really a triangle, right? In terms of debt service coverage, current ratio, and what your leverage is.
Great. I think you three completed the triangle there in the cumulative responses. So that's perfect way to bring it home on that. Well, a lot of the advice I think out there is going to be, know your financial position, which is sound advice, but we have a third or so of the audience saying they're unsure whether they're ready to talk to their lender or not. So it's possible they're unsure on exactly if they have a clear enough financial picture to be ready for the lender. So are there any I don't want to say mistakes, but any times where you encounter a farmer who thinks they have a good picture of their financial, but they're missing a piece? Is there any common, like, make sure you're paying attention to this because some people forget this? Anything come to mind on that? Becky, you're off mute, so I'm going to pick on you first.
That's okay. Thanks. I think one of the common things that gets forgotten would be family living expenditures that might not run through the farm checkbook. Certainly one of our jobs is to reconcile the change in working capital on the balance sheet every year. And when we find a hole, we try to develop questions that we can talk to our customer about as to, all right, why do you think perhaps there's this difference? Is it, as Grant mentioned earlier, is it just a change in the value of the commodity year over year? Or were there some expenditures that maybe we didn't get recorded? So I think it's worth the effort going back through your records for the year and making sure that you have a complete picture. I think I'm echoing some of the things we've said here before, but really understanding what happened, being able to show that we've recorded what's happened, and that way the decisions that are being made to go forward are good decisions.
And I believe Jeremy alluded to this earlier. Rebecca's exactly right. Nail all of that stuff down. And then also come into the meeting with your plan for 5 years, 3 years, 1 year. Have a plan going forward. So know what you're going to do with your unsold grain. Know what your expenses are starting to look like for this upcoming year. Maybe start to have an idea of where that break even could be. But also have that equipment plan in place. Do you have a landlord that's going to be selling to you in the next 5 years? Paint that full picture, because we can help you make financial decisions on whether or not to finance that equipment or not, based off of what's coming down the pipeline as well. If we need to keep that working capital strong because we've got to buy someone else out in 2 years, that helps us paint the full picture so we can give you the best advice possible.
And let's stay on this point about planning. So we've talked about the situation and maybe how we got into this situation. Looking forward, if we're not seeing right now, good opportunities to build in, to replenish the working capital, what types of planning things can we do to put ourselves in a better situation so that things don't get worse when it comes to, kind of controllables? And Jeremy, I don't know if you want to start us off on this one.
Sure. I think there's a couple different keys, and it's going to sound like a broken record, and I'm sure Grant and Becky would acknowledge this, and that's at the very beginning, you've got to know your cost of production. We have to know what it takes to put your crop in, what it takes to live. To Becky's point on all of that, and to start focusing on what that number is, because if you don't know that number, you're kind of just shooting darts onto the wall. And one of the things that I think that always gets missed is that we talk a lot about an operational break even or an operational expense, but we don't always go into that capital debt replacement family living number that's on top of that. And so if you know all of that, then I think you can start making plans that are what I like to say is the agronomic economic type decisions. And so what I mean by that is that if my goal is to raise 220 bushel corn, what is it going to take to get to there? And let's make sure we're laying expenses for that number, not for 280 if we've never grown 280. And so if you look at some of those types of things and how to defend the downside, if you start with your cost of production, then you can start utilizing your team of individuals, such as your broker, your banker. Maybe there's a consultant, maybe there's a mentor. You may have, before you have a board of directors, as to get a bunch of ideas of how are we going to defend this downside and improve profitability. And there's a ton of ways to do that. We could spend the rest of the morning talking about that. But if you don't know your full all-in cost of production, then your ideas can be you're just throwing stuff onto the wall.
So I totally agree with what Jeremy just said, but I also want to throw out this idea. We're in a down cycle. The experts are predicting that the down cycle isn't going to end in 12 months, maybe 24 months. But it's not the first down cycle we've been through, and it's not going to be the last down cycle that we're going to go through, right? So when you're talking about planning, and Grant brought up an excellent point, what are you hoping to do over the next 5 years, and how are you going to execute on that? Hope is not a plan. You have to actually work through how we're going to achieve those goals, whether it's there's a retirement, I need to buy another farm, whether it's I'm bringing another person into the operation and I need to be able to support that person. These are all things that you got to be thinking about. You might not be able to execute on any piece of that plan in 2025 because of our current situation, but that's not really unusual, right? We go through these tightening and expanding cycles. So be thinking about, don't be emotional about it. When we get the expanding cycle, have that plan in place so that you're making the right decisions. I need to add equipment. I need to add acres. I need to add cash flow so I can bring my son or daughter into this operation in 3 years when they graduate from college. Whatever it is, be ready. Because this isn't going to last forever. Farmers are always optimistic. They put a seed in the ground and hope that it grows, right? So every year we have that opportunity to be thinking about what we're going to do when those cycles turn on for us.
And Tim, I would say my most progressive and financially stable operators that I work with, they're really good at utilizing their resources. So whether it's, if they know that they're long on equipment, they're finding ways to pick up custom acres. If they have a labor force that sits around a few months out of the year, They are utilizing that labor force to go do some trucking or to fix up a house that they're going to flip. So they're really good at utilizing those resources and having the connections to generate more income, because you can only tighten your belt so much and you can only get so much out of the crop. And at some point in time, you have to be able to go and pull cash in from somewhere else. So utilizing your resources and where maybe you're long on some resources to generate that cash to build the working capital. Sometimes that's the only option.
And I was going to do this later, but you just like teed it up so perfectly, Grant. I can't miss this opportunity here. This is a good opportunity to bring in Ben from Fractal to talk about, one of those resources, one of those tools in the toolbox for kind of helping in this financial situation. Quick bio on Ben. Ben's the CEO of Fractal Ag, a passive farmland investment partner that invests alongside farmers rather than competing against them for land. After serving as an infantry officer in the U.S. Army, Ben worked in ag tech, management consulting, and private equity due diligence before his last role running Corteva Agriscience Carbon Program. Ben, thank you so much for hosting all of us. For Fractal, obviously, is hosting this webinar, but chime in here. You're hearing what the lenders are saying as far as the financial picture and the need to have resources and to have a plan. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, I think our perspective is very similar to the other folks here. You have to have that solid foundation from which to operate and to protect that family legacy. And I heard from all three of these folks, and I think Becky right at the end kind of brought it home of what is the forward-looking view and like what are all the options you have. For us, we really think of ourselves as equity capital, so that's why we're able to work with great banker partners. And we really think of it in two ways, kind of offense and defense. Let's talk defense first. You're in a spot where, you feel good about your margin, you feel good about your business, but you want to, hopefully before that conversation and in conjunction in that conversation with your banker, have a little bit more in those current assets and that dry powder, have more of a buffer for those unexpected repairs that Grant was talking about, or that landlord that might come out that Becky was talking about, or a little bit more flexibility on the marketing plan that Jeremy was talking about. We've seen several folks come in and take an equity injection to say, we want to be better positioned for this downturn, to have more security. And that security is also that springboard for growth. And that's where the offense comes in. And it's, you think about when, and Grant just had a great tweet where I think he retweeted from Nick Horeb, talking about a great farmer who had really kind of expanded. When are asset values most advantageous to buy? It's often in downturns. Especially assets that are going to come for sale maybe once every 30, 50, 70 years, maybe not again. Closing on your operating radius, something that works operationally from those agronomic economics, fits your playbook of what you're doing. How do you take advantage of those opportunities in a disciplined way, still falling within the ratios and that three-legged stool that Becky talked about, but still be able to take advantage for you or your family? That's where a partner like Fractal can come in, provide the capital without giving up control. And that control piece is really important because, we all have to sometimes take measured risk, but you really need to be measured. And what we've tried to do on our side is, measure the lack of control that sometimes investor partners can bring in, where often they want to come out at the worst time, which can exacerbate problems in these cycles. And so really it starts with put yourself in a good position, know what you can do with your banker, and then be prepared with the banker, and then be prepared with us, which is to say, figure out what we can do together. We're not a fit for everyone, and we want to be transparent where we are. Bring that banker into the conversation, and that way you're ready to, not just make it through the next 12, 24, maybe more, but turn it into an opportunity for you and your family.
And someone might be saying, well, I've heard of Fractal, but I thought they were like disrupting ag lending. And that's not the case, right? Here we are, having an ag lending conversation and talking about how Fractal fits in. So can you maybe talk to that a little bit about how Fractal and ag lending work hand in hand?
Yeah, we're trying not to really disrupt anything. It's actually more of just filling a big unmet need for farmers and, frankly, their banker partners. We have one of the best ag lending systems in the world, probably the best ag lending system in the world, par none. And really, one of the great reasons for that is we have great cash flow based lenders who are disciplined, who do things the right way, and that's why I think the industry is in a good place relative to the 1980s. The gap that exists when you have good cash flow based lenders is, we have a highly capital intensive business, and we have low margins. And there's no source of equity capital today that comes in alongside the lender to help grow those businesses. Every other capital intensive industry, I used to work close to where you live, Tim, in mining. And like at the mines, when we were trying to expand, we had outside financing that was both debt and equity. Farmers need to have that option, and it needs to be an option that comes alongside farmers versus just, hey, temporarily rent an asset that we're going to have control on. And so really when I look at these three folks and all of our farmers, like we want to be engaged with their banker partners. We're not here to steal market share. We're actually here to grow share for our farms and also then for the banks.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Ben. And we'll have opportunity towards the end here to express interest in what Fractal's doing, as well as what some of the other projects that are represented here on the panel have available to you. But Jeremy, I want to get back something that Becky said earlier about like maybe you have kids that want to come back on the farm. Am I understanding correctly that you have kids that want to come back on the farm? Are you in kind of a similar situation right now? I'm curious how you're kind of handling this in this environment.
We are actually, when Becky was talking, it kind of hit home big, to me. I've got two boys, both are in an ag program in a known ag school in Wisconsin. One of them wants to come back, be part of the farm. One of them potentially wants to be a vet or the farm along with that. And so, in my area, there's a lot of competition for land. A partner like Fractal Ag could be definitely beneficial on growing. I especially in some of these downturns, we've seen a lot of different types of businesses that will take equity injection. I think a farmer a lot of the times looks at a sale leaseback as a way to get some of that in, and maybe an equity injection would be good. So, I potentially might look at some of that type of stuff, but our business plan at this point in time is trying to expand and build out profit centers. Kind of to Grant's point here is that we're going to diversify. What can you do that brings more income into the net pool for every individual within the farm? And we're looking at some things within different agribusinesses as far as crop science type stuff or crop services type stuff, doing soil sampling, drone application, starting up a seed dealership. We're doing some other type of stuff that way that expands, expands in broadens where our revenue streams come from without being too heavy in just total overall acreage. And whether that's right or wrong, that feels right in the competitive landscape that we're at in Northern Illinois.
And Grant, I know you farm as well. I haven't asked you specifically about kind of how you all are handling the current working capital situation, the current farm economy, to the extent you're willing to share.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and I'll maybe jump back on top of what Jeremy was saying there, because while I farm on the side, I'm primarily a egg lender. But within my family operation, I do have a brother who just recently came back to the operation, and potentially another brother as well. So our operation is also looking to grow. And as my fellow panelists would know here, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of ways to grow by adding ground, and dozens of ways to finance a deal. And the more knowledgeable you are on those opportunities that are in front of you, the more opportunities you're going to have to actually say yes to some of that ground. It's not just going to the public auction that's out there, bidding the highest price and getting traditional financing with your traditional down payment. There are literally hundreds of ways that you can still buy that ground, even if it is on auction, or acquire and find different pieces of ground. So that's where you want to work with an experienced banker and explore something like Fractal. Know what your options are, know what that looks like, because your banker might be telling you, no, you can't buy this. But if you present to them an option like what Fractal has or some other opportunities that are out there, they might actually say, well, actually, this does fit in your box. We can grow this way. Thank you, presents me with this opportunity. So you want to arm yourself with as much knowledge as possible.
And one of those tools in the toolbox could be a farm buying toolbox, right? You want to talk about that?
Yeah, it could be. So, excuse me, fighting a little bit of a cold. So my website is farm640.com. And for this week only, I'm selling the Farm Buying Toolbox. So if you just go to my website, you'll be able to find that there. But the toolbox is geared towards helping farmers understand what their financials mean so they can improve their financial position so they can buy farm ground. So that's the three things that I'm covering within that toolbox to help the next generation of farmers grow. Because I am a part of a family farm. Several generations want to keep that in the farm. And so you have to arm yourself with as much knowledge as possible, as many tools as possible to be able to buy ground. And so I'm taking my 14 years of lending experience plus living on a farm, growing on a farm, and actually making several purchases myself in the last couple of years, put that all into the toolbox and just passing that knowledge along to you.
So I want to build off of Grant's opportunity that he's offering a little bit to say that, you know, we all have different skill sets, right? So I don't know if you became a farmer because you like to run equipment. I don't know if you became a farmer because you like the biology and the agronomy. I don't know if you became a farmer because you're a finance geek like us, but not everybody has the same skill set. So if you're doing this on your own, find the help that you need, right? Just because you're not an expert doesn't mean you can't find an expert or that you can't find someone that can teach you or train you. Your lender might be a really good conduit for that. You know, they might be able to point you to a consultant or a different kind of accounting package. If you need to really drill down on making sure that you understand your financials well. And if you're on the other side of it, you know, there are other types of consultants that can help. So use your lender as a resource, except that you're not going to necessarily know everything all the time. And as Ben was talking about, if you come in and talk to your lender and your lender is familiar with Fractal, this is an opportunity potentially, but there are lots of other opportunities too. So use the resources you have at hand to try to better your business.
Absolutely. Well, we're approaching the final 15 minutes today. We still have plenty to cover, but I do want to make sure if you have a question at all, please put it in the Q&A box. I would love to get our panelists to answer that for you before the hour is out. But let's talk about interest rates for just a minute, right? I think there's a sentiment out there that, okay, we went through this period of time of high interest rates, you know, quote unquote, what's high, right? High is a relative term. But we went through this period of quote unquote high interest rates and, you know, the Fed just lowered rates. So do we just need to kind of get by until they get down to levels they were at a couple of years ago? I think the answer to that is don't hold your breath, but I want to hear from your perspective. And Becky, maybe you could start on this one about kind of the current interest rate environment and how we should be thinking about where that might be headed.
Sure. I don't think that it's realistic, right, to expect that we're going to be financing on a long-term basis in the 3% range. I think that what we're seeing, and if you listen to different economists like we do, and you get the advice, it's looking very, very much like the long-term rates are kind of going to stay where they're at. Right. So when you're talking about financing equipment and land, you really need to use that as your cost or, you know, what it's going to cost you to finance it. Don't be sitting around waiting and thinking that the great refinance of a few years ago is going to happen again. On an operating basis, we are seeing, as we see the Fed lower rates, you know, 0.75% is meaningful compared to where we were a year ago. And perhaps we're going to get a little more benefit. But I think that the Fed's going to keep trying to bring those rates down a little at a time. But again, we're not going to be back in that 3% range. You know, we're probably going to be back in the high fives, maybe low sixes over the next 12 to 18 months, depending on what happens. So that's what I'm seeing in the market. I think the Fed's trying to bring the yield curve back into a normal, or what should be considered normal range. And so I think we need to have those realistic expectations that our cost of interest is not going to be what it was 3 to 5 years ago.
And Jeremy or Grant, anything to add to that?
Yeah, that was an excellent summary from Becky. The only thing I would want to add is a reminder that what the Fed does not necessarily correlate with land notes or equipment notes. So just because the Fed has a decrease in interest rates last month, they're expected to do it again here next month. that does not mean that land notes are getting any cheaper. They've actually been going in opposite directions for about the last 3 months. So land notes are near their peak still again here. So just keep that in mind.
All right. And yeah, one possible place for working capital in this environment is kind of land rebalancing or getting equity that way. We've kind of skirted around that today, but I would love for you all to kind of speak to what you need to know before you kind of take that route, or what to keep in mind. And Grant, if you want to speak to that a little bit, I want to make sure we touch on that before we run out of time here.
Becky alluded to the great rebalancing of a couple of years ago, and I'll be honest, with how tight cash flows are right now, it's not a great time to do any type of refinancing or restructuring or pulling debt out from an equity standpoint, because the cash flow just can't tolerate that amount of additional debt to service without additional income flowing in. So a new purchase may work because you have the new income flowing in to help support those payments, but just a straight debt out refinance probably isn't your best option right now, especially when you're talking about a 7 to 8% interest rate with the tight cash flows that we're seeing. So I'm trying to avoid that if possible. We're gonna have to find some other arrows in our quiver to help fix the balance sheets from my perspective, but I'm curious as to what the other two think.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of the sentiments Grant has. I would say there's maybe one caveat to that is that, if you, I think it's really, if you did go through the great refinance, or you're in accelerated depreciation or amortization on some of this, and you're in a good debt to asset perspective, that's about the only situation at this point in time where I think that you could really look at trying to rebalance, move some debt down the balance sheet and recapitalize. But again, as Grant said, and I think Rebecca said this at one point too, there's a cost to that, and the cost of that is the long-term obligation of that debt and what it does to your ability to service that debt. So you certainly want to be very, very careful as to where you go, how you do it, and what's out there available for you, and how it fits your long-term plan and where you want to go.
Can I talk about rebalancing in terms of our farming cycles?
Yeah,
Right.
please.
So we're in a down cycle. Maybe rebalancing is looking attractive to you, but don't forget that there's going to be another one. And how many times can you rebalance your assets? It may only be once. And so you have to weigh the future cost of a rebalance to today's needs. I don't like to promote sale of assets, but you really need to take a look at, do you need to harvest equity? That may be something you have to consider. Maybe you need to find that investor piece or find that equity piece in order to balance out your current debt load. Those are things that you've got to think about, because you could rebalance today and be back in the banker's office in 5 years and need another rebalance, and that's not sustainable.
That's a great point. Got a couple of really good audience questions that I want to get to before our time is up. The first one, this is for Ben, but it also relates to this whole conversation that all three have touched on here. It's about equity financing. It's an anonymous question saying, why is equity financing better than traditional financing? Are the payments lower in the short run in exchange for giving up appreciation at the end of the contract?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say they're better. They're just different. But the question asker actually had it right on. We're about 40% to 50% cash cheaper, depending on the exact terms, than a traditional farm mortgage, and that allows you within kind of the same kind of debt service coverage kind of bounds to be able to handle more while still being disciplined. So you're still going to use debt plus some fractal within the same kind of level, and you can get a bigger chunk of assets if that's the right decision to add to the overall income statement. So, I've heard Jeremy talk about equipment utilization and asset utilization in here. Scale has real benefits, and some of those right opportunities, especially while everyone else are facing the same headwinds that these three great folks have been talking about, there's going to be some attractive opportunities on the market. That's when you use something that's cash cheaper up front, and then on the back end, we'll share in that appreciation, but we're also sharing in land risk. And the land market does have some risk in it. I'm not going to speak for all of us, but I don't think we see land, bottoming out, but we do see it pretty flat. And so by having that kind of shared upside and downside and that symmetry with the farmer, that's also a little bit of risk management on that asset pool that you don't have if you're doing kind of a recapitalization or just using more debt. So it's not just taking more cash flows if you're using debt, but it's also kind of that symmetry that you're adding. And it's just a complementary tool in the toolbox. And you see it in almost any other capital intensive industry. So that way you can continue to work with great debt partners, but go a little bit further and faster and use your special sauce that makes your farm great and your kind of marginal advantage, and kind of scale that a little bit more.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah. Another audience question here. If the bank never seems to hesitate about a proposal I give them, does that indicate that they are comfortable with my management and financial position? Sometimes I wonder how bad things have to be before the bank says no. That's no in capital letters with an exclamation point. Jeremy, why don't you start in on this one?
All right. Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think maybe I'll cut it up this way and try and I'd love to hear Grant and Becky's take on this. But in my experience, I've seen, maybe three different types of borrowers. Ones that are rate focused, ones that always want, what that they're asking for. They want somebody to always say yes, and then they want some partner to build value. And so I think you're kind of, the types of customers I've looked at and utilized our services have been in those three categories. So rate, credit structure, or value. And I would just say this to whoever asked this question is that I would evaluate what it is that you want from your banking partner. And if it's value and you're not getting that, maybe it's time to put another lender on the bench and take a look at things if you're worried about them always saying yes. You may very well be in a position where all of your ratios are above your peers and you're poised for growth and you're an acceptable and potentially an excellent business manager. And that's a great place to be. But I think that, reevaluate what you're looking out of a business partner. Are you getting that? And then seeking out, a financial partner that's giving that to you is a big deal. And I think that sometimes you need to look at some of those types of things as well when you're working with your partners.
You guys aren't going to throw another lender under the bus. I will say we have had conversations where farmers have had lenders that say yes, 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 until there's that no. And then it's really hard to get another lender without something really gnarly for your business. So, discipline wins and having multiple sources of capital wins, and they tend to go hand in hand. So I couldn't agree more, Jeremy.
Yeah, I was going to say almost the exact same thing, is that a lender that says yes all the time and isn't giving you feedback on what this yes means, right? That may not be the right person. You want your lender to be as a trusted partner. You want them to be vested in your organization and in you and your family, understanding what you're doing. Sometimes saying no to a customer, I mean, I've done it. I don't like saying no to a customer, but I usually do it when I think it's the best thing for the customer, right? They may not want to hear it, and they may decide that they want to go find someone that says yes, and that's okay. Because if I'm saying no, it's because I think that that's the decision I would recommend you make if we were just sitting together having a conversation, not in the bank, right? So you want to take a look if that lender's saying yes all the time. Maybe it's not in your best interest. And no, I'm not going to throw another lender necessarily under the bus. But when they do say no, it's going to be a hard no. And that's going to be way worse than taking the incremental baby steps.
Great. This has been a fantastic discussion. I But we've got a couple more audience questions that are really good that I'm hoping to get to, and I want to give each panelist a chance to give us a quick tip to leave with to get a quick win after this panel. But we do have one more poll I want to bring up on the screen here. We have one more poll, so for you all in the audience to answer, and then we're going to get to these final questions. The poll here is, would you like any of the organizations to follow up with you? Fractal, which you've heard of, Farm 640, which is Grant and the Land Buying Toolbox, Old National Bank, which you've heard from Becky. We haven't mentioned AgView Solutions, though. So while they're filling out that poll, Jeremy, you want to just talk a little bit about AgView Solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. AgView Solutions is really a trusted advisor and a partner to what we're doing, within our farming operation. A lot of the times we hear, I'm in a bit of a unique situation, or we have a huge challenge or opportunity facing us that we're not really sure how to handle. And we work with those types of situations, as well as many, routine and normal scenarios, such as transition planning, business structuring, strategic growth, and more. And ultimately, we just want to provide you with the most value and get your operation moving towards your goals. A lot of the times we're really we're really, accountability coaches, and giving you that third party look, and, just to give perspective of size and what we do at this point in time, we're in 22 states, in a couple Canadian provinces here. And again, our goal is to help you, achieve your goals as well.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. And then Becky, I'd mentioned Old National Bank, that they lend across the Midwest, all throughout agriculture and agribusiness. Anything else you want to mention on that?
We do really focus in mostly on, row crops and livestock. But in terms of our capabilities, capacity, we are a full service bank. So if you need trust services, if you're looking for wealth planning, we also offer those options. So we really want to come in and be a full circle banker for you, not just focusing down on, getting an operating loan renewed. So there are other services that we offer. And if you're working with your banker and you're not finding that you're getting what you need, we'd be really happy to talk to you.
Great. Well, thank you. Fill out that poll here. We got Fractal Agriculture, the Land Buying Toolbox from Farm 640, AgView Solutions, and Old National Bank. If it only lets you select one, then make sure you tell that person when you talk to them that you also are interested in the others, or just reach out to these folks directly. I think there'll be a follow-up email from this. But before we go here, we have someone who's been waiting patiently in the audience to get their question answered. It says, as a farmer, we see the benefits of buying equipment or land to build the farm, but would we get a better return on our return on help on our management of the farm? For me, it's hard to write a check for a subscription to farm accounting software when my spreadsheets work for me, but sometimes I fall behind and may not be up to date on my numbers. What have you seen as a win for farmers by adding partners to their management side of the farm? And Jeremy, you're shaking your head most vigorously, so why don't you take this one?
Yeah, so, I think farming in general has really changed, and as that has scaled, so has the qualifications and core competencies of the actual manager or visionary. When my grandfather farmed, he started our farm here. He used to say, if you take care of the machinery, the land, and the livestock, that everything else will take care of itself. And I certainly think that that's true. But if you're the visionary in the operation, and you're the manager, the visionary part, you need to build a team around you. And that team can consist of multiple different types of individuals. Obviously, today we've talked about the importance of the banker. But I would say there's also importance of, an attorney. There's importance of, just overall accounting. And so to this question on the accounting side, you have to know your numbers. And so that's whether or not you're working with, a software or something that's web-based, or even, consultative type solutions that are out there. I think you need to work on your business, not in your business. And so sometimes you lose the value of that, that monthly subscription fee versus chasing after those, $300 to $500, $1 an hour jobs, as the visionary of the business. And so I think you need to keep that perspective when you're trying to build out your team or you're making decisions on what to cut. Don't cut the stuff that keeps you able to draw in those $300 to $500 an hour jobs, and continue to be the visionary.
That's well put. Appreciate that. Well, we are at the hour. So in the interest of time, I want to see if we could just get one actionable piece of takeaway advice from each of you so that people can leave this webinar and get a quick win to be ready to meet with their lender. And Grant, let's give you the first crack at that. Ben, I'm going to give you the option to chime in here too. So keep those wheels turning.
Tim, if you don't pay attention to your spouse, things are going to go bad. So if you're not paying attention to your working capital, tracking it year over year and paying attention to it, you're not going to have any.
All right, Becky.
I'm going to say know your cost of production. Understand what you're going to do with the working capital that you have, right? Put that plan together.
Excellent. Jeremy.
I'm going to just say we're all human. Bankers are human. Farmers are human. We all know that, mistakes can happen. Things can happen. One bit of advice and takeaway is that if you're in that position or things don't look rosy, just be honest. I don't think we're as scary as at times people think we are. If you are in a situation where the lender is really scary, again, maybe it's time to reevaluate. But I think honesty, transparency, and getting in early and talking about your challenges and where you're going to go from there is a huge, huge win before you come into renewal season.
All right, Ben.
Say, if you look at where you want your farm to be 5, 10, 15 years, and you can't do the math on how you're going to get there, you need to start working on that right now with your banker partner, with any other advisor you have, or with somebody like us. And my guess is, and I recognize most of the names that are on here, most farmers I know who have above benchmark margins have more investable opportunities than they have capital. If you think you can just wait and that capital will show up when there's that once in a generation opportunity, which is what a downturn can often be, whether it's with us or with a banker, you are probably wrong and you're putting your business at risk. And so if you're not willing to go spend a couple of hours with your banker or the couple of hours with my team, that is probably a couple of hours you will never get back again, because we will not be always there right when you need it, because we will have other folks in line ahead of you. So being prepared, being ahead, being willing to engage with that future is often going to be the difference between a farm that will thrive in the next 5 to 10 years, which will then determine the next 20 or 30, versus one that will have to really gut it out and make it work. And farmers are really good at that. But I think farming, like Jeremy has said, like farming is changing, and the implications of these things are getting greater and greater.
Excellent. What a great hour. This is jam-packed and very exciting for a panel of bankers. Like I think this was I'm all jazzed up. Although my wife is down getting the kids ready for school. And so when Grant said that pay attention to your spouse, I felt like he was talking directly to me, because here I am up here. But thank you all for tuning in. We'll follow up with an email. Would you do me a favor and just share this with someone else? Because I think there's some really, really great information here for anyone wanting to grow a farm business in 2025. So thank you so much for being here, and look forward to the follow-up from this poll, because it looks like there is some follow-up needed. But thank you all very much. And we will close out the webinar now.